Now at 3, we're following breaking news out of Arizona. The state Supreme Court there has ruled that the state can enforce its law criminalizing all abortions except when a mother's life is at stake. The group Arizona for Abortion Access protested following the ruling. It's gathering signatures to put a measure on November's ballot that would amend the state's constitution to provide a right to an abortion. The ruling comes as abortion is a key issue heading into the November presidential election. Just yesterday, former President Trump released a video saying each state should have the power to decide whether to ban abortions. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden fired back, releasing a new ad about a Texas woman denied an abortion after a miscarriage. She says she now may not be able to get pregnant again.
More